Hi, it's Tina from Tina Clark Inspired Wellbeing. So everyone is talking at the moment about trauma, and rightly so. Those experiences we have as children can greatly impact who we are today. The fantastic work of Dr. Gabor Mate puts forward the theory that trauma underlies virtually all chronic disease. But for those of us who have chronic disease, how does trauma continue to impact us? Dr. Stephen Porges created the polyvagal theory, which explained how, as humans, we have a deep, deep need for safety and to feel safe. And when you think about it, people with chronic disease, we not only have to go into many challenging experiences, frightening experiences in hospitals, with operations, seeing many doctors, which even for the average person does tend to cause a slightly anxious feeling. But we also have the added factor that our physical body becomes not a safe space. This is called the enduring somatic threat model of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I find that it's really not spoken about much, but I think it will start to come into the conversation much more as more of us are facing chronic disease. So what are some of the ways that we can actually deal with this ongoing sense of lack of safety in our own physical body? Well, first and foremost, I think the key thing, although it's easier said than done, is to gain a little perspective, make the chronic disease just one aspect of life. I know that chronic disease can seep into all areas of your life, but it really is important to not let the disease invade your every living thought. There's also a heavy emphasis, in my opinion, on creating a friendship again with your body. If you're born with chronic disease, you may never have had a safe feeling in your body or have built that friendship. But it is one aspect that I believe needs to be really worked on, and it takes time and patience, but it does arrive. Another key factor with chronic disease is that we can feel hugely disempowered and kind of hopeless, especially as the medical system really doesn't have many resources to help us with our symptoms of chronic disease. So partly for me, empowerment means gaining knowledge and understanding. So the more we get to know our body, the more we get to know what works for us, what doesn't work for us. When are we going into fight, flight, or freeze? When are we dropping into hopelessness and depression? When are we hyper-aroused and going into anxiety or obsessive thought patterns? We can learn resilience and coping techniques and gather resources. For example, one of the key themes of having chronic disease is that most of us isolate ourselves because A, we want to be independent, and also we don't want to burden anybody else or bore anybody else with the moaning or the many repetitive feelings and experiences we have. But one of the key things to living with a chronic disease in a more healthful way is to have at least one person that we can turn to just share a cup of tea or explain how we feel, or have a shoulder to cry on, or someone who just can be there to support us in moments when we are struggling. Movement is a wonderful way to work with chronic disease, and not strenuous, exhausting movement, but somatic movement, so we can start to really have contact with our body in a safe way again. Also, when we have chronic disease or extreme stress, we can really contract, so the body can become very tight and rigid, and that in turn can make us feel tight and rigid and more stressed. So we can also work with different techniques and ways of moving to work with that contraction and maybe work into releasing. There are various breath techniques we can work with. Even with a lung disease, we can work with some very gentle breath techniques that help us come into our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of our nervous system that helps us, makes us feel calm, safe, relaxed. It can be really challenging with regards to the stress and trauma associated living with chronic disease, but there really are ways to work with it. But through this body-mind approach, we can really gather knowledge and tools that will help not only empower us in our chronic disease and in our emotional state, but also bring us back into balance, bring us back into the present moment and out of that repetitive traumatic cycle